Good morning and welcome to Sales Chatter, the logistics podcast where we try to help 10,000 reps hit a million GP. I'm your co-host, Ryan Mohammed. With me is my good friend, the Bodacious Cowboy, President and CEO of RGTX Logistics Solutions, Jeff Dickinson. How you doing this morning, brother?
Good, my man. It is Wednesday. It is hump day here on Sales Chatter Live. We have such a program today, not just one program, but two. Another one at 2 o'clock this afternoon. But right now, we have two guests. We have Dean Croke and Bill Robinson. So with that said, let's get into it. Let's go.
Boom.
To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.
And there we go. Today, personally, Jeff, I'm extremely looking forward to it because when we had Tracy and Rochelle on a couple weeks ago, I mentioned to you that it's always really cool to interview friends.
Yeah.
But it's even better when you actually come off that conversation and you learn a little bit more about them, of who they are, what their values are, not necessarily in having a one-off conversation with them or things like that. So today, like I said, I'm really excited because we have three titans, yourself included. For Data Day, we have Dean Croke, we have Bill Robinson. And Bill Robinson is the Director of Carrier Relations at Wellington Group of Companies. He's someone that I've seen over social media and everything like that in collaboration, that he's always willing to help out someone.
Yeah.
I saw a post yesterday where he was having a conversation with a young gentleman, and the quote that he left that gentleman with was, "Hey, if we all do our part to make this industry better, one day at a time, change will happen." And it's just not only in the way that he operates, because you guys will see the experience and the grit that he has. But one thing I read that I really enjoyed about him is that he actually volunteered at the Special Olympics of Canada as a golf lesson specialist. And anybody who knows Bill, he's actually really good at golf. I heard if you actually want to bet some money, you don't want to go against Bill. So I want to introduce Bill Robinson, Director of Carrier Relations at Wellington Group of Companies, to Sales Chatter this morning. Good morning, Bill. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Morning, Bill.
Morning, Jeff.
There we go. And as everyone's kind of getting to it. So, Bill, without any doubt, how long have you been in the industry? What does a Director of Carrier Relations do? And what is something that you've learned lessons that we can all take advantage of?
I've been in the transportation industry a little bit longer than 20 years now, I guess, at this point. I started off in the logistics industry, working for one of the great companies that got purchased by XPO. I had the opportunity to learn transportation management solutions and transportation management software at a very high level, functioning technology-based company. Then from there, I went to work still in logistics with one of the largest in Canada, being Traffic Tech. And from there, that's when I started transition and moving into working with asset companies, building logistics divisions. Was fortunate enough that Manny Calandrino and Ron Tepper in the group at Fast Freight asked me to come join their company, which certainly gave me exposure to a lot of big data, working with a company with 17 terminals across a network, one of the last large independent LTLs. More importantly, of course, it certainly exposed me, being the largest partner for CP Rail from an equipment standpoint, to the rail aspect of it and getting more of the detail, the relationship, seeing what a high volume shipper doing 30,000 containers a year does, and the challenges they go through in doing something of that nature. I was fortunate enough that I met Derek Koza, the CEO here at Wellington, some 10 years ago when we were working together at Fast Freight. And after building logistics divisions on behalf of asset companies, last year in the fall at some point, Derek had asked me to meet with him to discuss joining Wellington. And I met with him and Brett Rowland, our Vice President of Business Development. And I'm very happy and fortunate now at this point to be part of, I think, the best transportation group in North America.
What more can you really ask for? And with that experience and that knowledge of you coming over to Wellington Group Companies, and like you said, one of the best companies in the world, it really truly is. Can you tell everybody that you have a newsletter that you publish every week to kind of give some information to, let's say it's a rookie coming out of there, or somebody who's been in the industry for a couple of years, or someone who's a veteran like yourself? What is the aim of your newsletter that you do, and when is it available?
Generally speaking, we try to publish one every Monday of the beginning of the week. The shipper report that we do, there's one that's called Bill's Corner we do with a very large technology-based company in the U.S. and we've been publishing these, and the goal and the aim behind it is to not only help and coach and mentor younger people in our division, in our industry, bring our industry together from a closer standpoint, to work more closely together. The stronger we are, whether it be asset, whether it be the logistics group of companies, that we are able to serve as shippers in a better manner. The other aspect of it, because a lot of the shippers currently right now, and a lot of the senior people from some large North American shippers have also decided to start following and join the newsletter. It is intended as well to provide shippers with an overview of what we deal with in logistics and asset to service their actual supply chains, and to give a preview of certain things that they may be looking for, maybe have to take quarter by quarter, in certain cases on an annualized basis, as to what they'll see with market trends coming.
That's awesome, Bill. You know what? We're going to get into one of your favorite topics, rail moves. But before we do, we're going to bring in our good friend, Dean Croke from DAT Analytics. Morning, Dean.
Good morning.
Yeah, there you go.
Still make the rookie mistake.
Yeah, how are you doing this morning?
Yeah, I'm good. We survived the nor'easter. We're supposed to be
what happened?
Once in a generational nor'easter. Like, it's I said to some people, how windy is it? And I said, well, it's like on our farm in Australia, we'd say it'll blow a dog off the chain. It's that windy. And they're our sheepdogs we had on a long run. But anyway, long story. But non-event. It was pretty windy, but
the same here.
We had no snow out on Cape Ann, but it was 3 feet of snow further inland around 495. So it was tough sledding for a lot of carriers running up 495, in particular yesterday. But New England is adept at getting rid of snow quickly when it falls. So it's rarely, in my time here, I've rarely seen roads not passable for big trucks. So I really wasn't a lot of impact on the freight network this storm, or even this year for that matter.
Yeah, I mean, 90 going straight up through there, that's always clear. I mean, that's like one of the major routes that are always taken care of first and foremost. And you never see a backup on that route. I mean, a long time ago in the 70s you did, but not nowadays.
Right.
Yeah. So listen, let's get into the February imports. I just ran into some really big news. I don't know if you read it, but let's get into February imports first.
Yeah, so Piers database is out yesterday. Piers is the sister company of Journal of Commerce, which is part of IHS Market, which is part of Standard & Poor's Platts. So pretty big company. Piers is the data set that's amassed from the bills of lading that get processed through the Customs and Border Patrol each month. So it's a little bit lagged, but it's a monthly data set that clears in the first week of the month. February data was just in. Unbelievable drop in volume. I did some calcs on it. So the headlines are that, so remember everybody, this is the quiet season. So these numbers, shouldn't be alarming. But when you have year-over-year comparisons to last year, which was a record year from import volumes, all of these numbers sound bad. But let me put that into context for you. So when you look at it year-over-year, volumes are down about for 24% year over year. So 24% fewer containers, 20-foot equivalent units, TEU, down about 16% from January to February. So a big slowdown there on that front. When you look at where they are in totality, though, at one point, let me just quickly do the math here, at 1.7 million, I think it was 1.77 million 20-foot equivalent units were imported in February. That's almost a million TEU less than last May's record high. That's a lot of containers. And, most of that reduction has happened on the West Coast because of the ongoing contract labor discussions, which still haven't been resolved. We're coming up on 8 months, maybe 9 months of that being unresolved. Talks are underway. That scared a lot of shippers. They redirected a lot of freight to the Gulf and East Coast. So that's a data point we've shared a lot on the show, is the coastal shift in volume. I don't know if you noticed this week that Journal of Commerce reported that Norfolk Southern are going to start a service out of Norfolk to Memphis, a daily service. I think it's like 600 miles. But so what's important is, as they've lost volume on the West Coast from Los Angeles to Chicago, they now have to think about, where do we get other volume? And we talked about this last week. Will they get into shorter haul lanes? Because rail really owns 1,500 mile plus, the intermodal sector. That's
over
pretty much
700 is profitable.
Yeah. So that's interesting, because there's been a good amount of truckload come out of Norfolk in particular since they deepened the port and put some new terminals and cranes in. So again, what we're starting to see is that A, there's a shift to the East Coast, and it's sustained, and B, though, intermodal is looking to get some of that share back from truckload. So that's sort of the numbers.
Something, and I want to get Bill involved in this conversation too. I just read this, that the Transportation Board just approved the merge between Canadian Pacific and Kansas City Southern, and they're expecting over 64,000 truckloads to be moved over to rail. Love to get both of your thoughts on that and the impact that it's going to have on the trucking industry. Bill, you want to go first on that?
I'll go first, sure. Meeting with CP last week with respect to this is going to be a game changer, and it is going. CP currently right now, on an annualized basis, will do roughly 800,000 containers cross-border per year. With this expansion that they're working on now, it's going to give a direct line to run not only the grain right down to Mexico, but obviously intermodal containers and boxes as well. So this handshake and connection that's now being finished with this relationship is going to improve the intermodal process significantly from Canada to Mexico and U.S. The anticipation from speaking with CP, by the time it's all ready and put in place, there will be some larger players that will be on the system before that, but we're still probably 8 to 12 months away before that will be something that we'll be seeing that we marketed to the regular shippers outside of their core top 10.
So you're going to see that probably right in November, December, around that time, right?
Correct. That's when we anticipate that we will start being able to come to market as, Wellington Group and the other IMCs and resellers on the CP network. That's when we'll start to probably have access and be starting to put a real push forward from a marketing standpoint for that line.
Awesome. Hey, Dean, what about you? What are your thoughts on that merge?
I think it directly relates to what we've talked about in the show, which is the nearshoring that's been going on in the last 18 months. We've seen an increased volume of truckload freight. I think it's something maybe close to 80%, maybe more, of all imports come across the southern border via truck. That will clearly shift if you've now got straight through loading between Mexico and into big markets like Memphis, and Chicago in particular, on that north-south lane. So I think a pretty big deal. It's a huge deal for trucking, but it's interesting because truckload is losing a bit of market share to intermodal already on the longer haul lanes. That could obviously extend to some of those longer runs from north to south. So the extrapolation of all that would be, in a year's time, you would expect that some decrease in truckload volume out of those border markets, in particular Laredo and El Paso, maybe even, although produce is predominantly what comes across the McAllen market. So maybe Laredo would be the market where we'd see lower flatbed volumes. As we mentioned, I think late last year, we've been seeing freight volumes across the southern border in the spot market grow at about 9% per year for the last 5 years. So there's been a shift towards Mexico long before the pandemic. It was obviously accelerated during the pandemic. And as we, have our sort of China plus one supply chain strategies where people are adding in another country to build in some redundancies into their supply chains, Mexico has been a favorite company for some of those products that are not not like iPhones that require a lot of moving parts and labor. I think there'll be certain commodities that'll stick with truckload. So yeah, that's my take on it. We need a highly functioning rail network in this country, but we do compete heavily with intermodal on the longer haul lanes, which is where a lot of DAT spot market business resides. So for us, it's something we're watching very carefully. What we've seen though in the last little while is because of low truck prices, it's interesting. We've seen more LTL and intermodal volume move to truckload because of truckload's lower prices.
Yes.
So there's always give and take in this market, but we do need our shippers on our shipper side of our business desperately need a highly functioning intermodal network, and it's been anything but that for a couple of years, especially during this period of the pandemic since May 2020.
Yeah, and something that really depends on inventory levels at these large shippers who are thinking about going IMDL, because can they afford the extra transit time of having their inventory on the rail, say 1 to 2 days extra, depending upon how many times that they turn their inventory. And, based on what Bill just said about, around that November, December time when they really start ramping up, I wonder how that's going to affect, think about that transition and how many are actually going to move over to the rail when they're trying to, load up shelves and get their product to market. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, I know it's very hard to determine what's going to happen, but I mean, just to get your thoughts on that.
Well, Jeff, one thing I would share is if you look at the information from November of last year, the cross-border traffic between Mexico and Canada was actually up 22.6%, as per Lawrence and Gross and a bunch of individuals that track this like DAT and follow this. So the onshoring or nearshoring that's been taking place for quite some time, revenue was up 22.6%. For the first time, Mexico actually had $49 million in trade in November versus Canada, and they were at the highest position. All of that was still truck movements. And to your point, Jeff, anybody that is going to be shipping automotive, anything with any time sensitivity, and there still is JB Hunt and the other individuals that have been servicing Mexico on rail, their imbalance is significant. In certain cases of COVID, if we look at a CAS ratio that Dean, I follow on with Dean and the analytic people, we were at a 12-to-1 from an inbound outbound ratio. So if there's only one container for every 12 coming out, it's still a challenge for that to be managed. And that's where I think the CP and the KC team are going to work closely to make that work.
Yeah, and when you think about incentives, with carbon footprints and trying to reduce that, and a lot of companies going green, I wonder how that's going to affect that, especially now, because, there's just not enough freight out there. They're not going to the intermodal, like Dean just said, they're going OTR because of the spot rates are just unbelievable right now. But I mean, I'm just curious, like, how is that going to impact, these government incentives when you look at that CO2 and trying to save on that, and they need to reach those certain plateaus, that certain percentage in order to get that incentives. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, because I know it's green is a big thing. It always has been, but I'm just curious about your thoughts on that.
Again, we do use intermodal is a great way to reduce the carbon footprint for any one of the large shippers we work with. At the same time, again, Wellington Group of Companies, for the last 4 years, we've been running a unique system where we do load trailers inside of Mexico. We shunt them across into San Diego, and we will rail them into Illinois or some other point or inland terminal in the U.S. And the Illinois we will bring by truck up into Canada. So it's something we've been doing for quite some time to help reduce the carbon footprint for large electronic companies and manufacturers on the east coast of Mexico. So it's going to continue as the carbon footprint becomes more of a challenge. It's going to continue to be, as long as you have the time and you have the ability to manage your supply chain, the rail will become a focal point for a lot of shippers at this point.
I hope so. I love the rail.
Yeah, you guys are definitely big rail guys. But there's one thing that I saw, gents, that was pretty crazy to kind of see, and that was all the flooding that was really happening in Salinas and Fresno. Dean, can you talk a little bit about the impacts and what you've kind of seen? Because I know you sent a little
Yeah.
video yesterday about that.
Yeah, a couple of data points that were interesting, like about 450,000 acres of land there in the Salinas market. Of course, that's where Driscoll's are, the big strawberry company. We saw a video this week that at its peak, they load about 600 reefers a day out of there, loaded with strawberries. So it's the big player. Just south of there is, of course, where all the lettuce is grown, all the leafy greens. On our IQ show a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about flooding from January and then freezing cold, which destroyed a lot of the seedlings. But on the weekend, we had torrential rain, levees break, the Salinas River overflowing. And I think the data point that really shocked me, I wasn't aware of this, but about 80% of our lettuce or winter vegetables in particular between April and July come from Salinas. That's why it's such a big produce market. On our MCI maps, it's in the San Francisco freight market, adjacent to Fresno and Los Angeles, which also covers the Oxnard area where a lot of produce comes from. So that whole area has been devastated by water. And of course, that's going to delay produce season. We've got folks out on the ground now doing some assessments on the impact, but that will delay produce season, from a volume perspective, thinking about the impact on freight networks. And what that'll do is delay the increase in spot rates that we normally see mid-year. And it typically occurs between April and July 4. It's anything up to 25 cents a mile lift on both reefer and dry van. It's one of the few events that lifts both dry van and reefer seasonally with such a pronounced effect. If the produce season is delayed and volumes are affected, then we could have the same as last year, which was a fairly muted produce season, but for different reasons. Last year it was too little water. This year it's too much. So we're watching this really closely because we've been talking about an inflection point in the spot market sometime in April, May. But if produce volumes stay low like they are, the weekly truckload volumes reported to the USDA down about 12% compared to this time last year, but down as much as 60% out of California. And remember, California, we get about half of our truckloads out of California over the course of a year in the refrigerated market. So this rain is a really big deal for truckload carriers that run west to east and back again. There's a lot of dedicated teams that run out of that particular market. So we're watching it closely. The flooding is obviously devastating for lots of reasons, not just the freight market. But I think it's one thing that will have a big impact on spot rates throughout the course of the year. And, we saw some big events in our past 3 years, like the polar vortex in 2021, that really upset the spot market for the rest of that entire year. And this flooding in California has all of the potential to do the same, even though it's a small footprint when you think about the geography compared to the polar vortex, because there's so much concentration of produce growing within sort of that Northern California market. I'm expecting to see fairly severe impacts on volume and then more downward pressure on price. And for carriers that are already struggling, that's not good news.
Mm-hmm. So I wonder, we talked about vertical farming, right? I wonder if that's going to put a lot of more pressure on that side of the business, because it always takes a catastrophic event for people to react instead of looking at the what if scenarios. You heard me talk about what ifs all the time to attack it proactively in case something happens. But now everybody's in that reactive mode, right?
Right.
It's okay, so what do we do now, to prevent that in the future? Will vertical farming be something that will come a lot quicker than rather later?
Right.
What's your thoughts?
It's, dare I say, we could take a leaf out of, Bill's book and get busy with what they're doing in Leamington, with all of the glass houses that grow so much produce. You guys are pretty active in that area. In Canada, if you think about all those glass houses, I'm going to call them glass houses. There's probably a more technical term for that, but greenhouses. There you go. So along Lake Ontario, as you run between, Toronto and Buffalo, right? There's a lot of them there. You go to to Amsterdam, and you see nothing but greenhouses growing flowers where they control light. The downside is the energy cost to run those 24/7. But there's lots of upside too in terms of water, control of water and produce yield. So I think it's one of those things that will happen. I just don't know if it's going to be on a scale that it'll make it viable to switch from such big areas like California. Remains to be seen.
Yeah, Bill, what are your thoughts on that? Since Dean brought that up, that you do a lot of that up there in Canada. What are your thoughts on that subject?
Well, I'm not going to be an expert by any means on vertical farming. However, I do think when it comes down to any geopolitical, weather, any of these type of things, they impact our industry very quickly. So whether we're dealing with a COVID that took place in China shutdown that slowed down things to that extent, when we deal with a Russian invasion of a Ukraine and how it affects fuel, all of these things are going to have a negative impact. And weather, of course, Mother Nature, hurricanes affect fuel. Hurricanes affect areas we can service by truck and or rail. So, what's going on and what's happening right now is going to drive rates, and it's going to continue to drive rates until such time that it is actually resolved.
Yeah, and something, Bill, I'm that type of person, more proactive than reactive, and I always like to look at the what-if scenarios. I think you probably do as well, just talking with you. But it's those things that are predictable, that you have good database to fall back on, that where you can predict those things happening. What are the things that you see coming up in the very near future that people should look out for, logistics people precisely should be looking out for, that they may not know right now?
Some of the things that, the groups and the networks we're all connected with that are reaching out to me as well. One of the biggest things for logistics people is keeping an eye on the asset carriers and the relationships that we are building. When you look at the carriers that entered the market during COVID, because the rates and everything else were very enticing to come in, it made it a very profitable, profitable thing to look at. But the equipment costs that these individuals that entered the market during that period, they paid were considerably higher. And as a result, we end up in a position where these particular carriers currently right now, if the current rate of a dry van prior to COVID was $44,000 and they've paid $80,000 to $82,000, the rates right now that the market has adjusted to are not going to support these high equipment costs. So bankruptcies are anticipated and predicted through several people, not only at the financial level, but obviously looking at that from factoring companies that are working with these carriers. That's one of the biggest concerns for logistics people, to make sure the partners they're working with have financial stability. By the same token, we've already seen right now this year, the shippers that are doing RFPs and RFQs, a larger factor for them now, the word sustainability. And a lot of people, when they look at the word sustainability, they're thinking eco, or they're thinking something from a standpoint of energy, carbon. What the shipper is looking for is financial sustainability and a supply chain sustainability. Both of those mean that the people that they're selecting now are not necessarily the lowest rate or the best rate are being provided, but they're providing a competitive rate and also the financial stability to be able to manage the supply chain on a long-term basis.
I agree.
What a spectacular! I told you guys that today was going to be a banger of just getting three titans in a room and letting them. I sense a keynote speech from all three of you guys in the conference in the near future with you three guys. And Dean, one thing that I was looking at based on one of your reports was that the Association of Equipment Manufacturers in the U.S. said that U.S. agriculture tractor sales finished in January in the negative. I assume we're probably not going to have the February numbers yet, but can you talk a little bit about, I know we always kind of talk hey, dry van might be up, reefer might be going down, but flatbed, open deck is a little bit kind of steady. Can you talk to what's going on in the open deck market?
Yeah, we're seeing, so spot rates have been climbing for several weeks for open deck. And when I say open deck, that could be anything from a flatbed to a drop deck to a double drop to an RGN. So our category of flatbed is fairly broad and all-encompassing, but is changing. We'll soon have on our load board categories for each of those individual flatbed types that I just talked about. But again, seasonally, this is when we expect flatbed rates to start to increase. Machinery sales is one thing that I watch in particular, particular places like Baltimore, which is the epicenter for imports of machinery from both Asia and Europe. We see a lot of small farm tractors, 100 horsepower tractors, right up to broadacre farm tractors, right through to combines. Baltimore is particularly interesting because it's sort of adjacent to the Midwest manufacturing companies like John Deere and Caterpillar and the likes. So we watch machinery sales pretty closely, and I think the data point that was interesting from the Association of Equipment Manufacturers report, which looks at ag and construction sales, ag equipment sales were pretty much in line with the 5-year trend line, even though they were down in February. What's important to remember is, and I'm not sure I wrote that in the article, and I probably should have in hindsight, this is the quiet season. We are probably a few weeks away from the peak. So imports of machinery sales typically peak in March and April, which again coincides with planting season in the Midwest. So volumes are down. This is a free report from the Association of Manufacturers. If anybody wants to read it, Kurt Blades, one of the vice presidents there, puts out a report middle of the month typically. And he talks about all of the ag sales, both here and in Canada. Canada's been the star of the show so far. Industry-wide growth in Canada, combine harvesters up 180% year over year. Total tractor sales were up 7% year over year. So Canada is a very different story, and I'm not sure why. I haven't been closely following that market. But to answer sort of the broader question, Ryan, is that not just machinery sales are, heading into the peak season, and we're seeing a lot more volume come out of Baltimore. Spot rates are sort of going up also. There's a 30% increase in spot volume last week. Capacity was tight. Rates are up 30 cents a mile to $2.85. Right, so you think about flatbed rates nationally at about $2.05. They're about 80 cents a mile higher out of Baltimore, which is a really interesting data point if you're thinking about where do you put your trucks. But this is March is also the month when steel imports start to peak. So we're heading into that period also. The downside will be, of course, building into single-family housing starts have, tanked largely. So that's being offset by, better volumes in the machinery front, particularly out of some of the markets like Houston and Baltimore. So that's sort of the flatbed story. Flatbed volumes are, we're seeing, so the different people ask, well, why are dry van rates dropping and reefer rates dropping, but flatbed rates going up? Well, largely flatbed is about 25% of all loads in flatbed in DAT's network move on spot, whereas compared to dry van and reefer, it's more like 10%. So there's a lot more volume in flatbed in spot because a lot of it's one-off project work on origin destination pairings that might not have been negotiated in a routing guide. And the other thing is, though, you can't interchange. Like you can interchange between dry van and reefers with the same freight, but you can't do that with flatbed. So it tends to be more, what's the word I'm looking for? It tends to be more sort of siloed in that regard. So we've seen a lot of capacity leave the industry. I think flatbed seems to have reached a point of equilibrium where demand and capacity have sort of evened out a bit. If I can use spot rates increasing as a way to sort of determine that, very different than dry van and reefer where volumes have been fairly flat, but we've got way too much capacity in those two markets. So that's sort of the flatbed story. It's still a good story for carriers. It's interesting, when I was out in Knoxville the other day, I saw, you always can tell this capacity migration that goes on. I was seeing flatbed carriers with headache racks and lift axles under dry vans, and you say, well, what's going on there? Well, it's because, obviously there might have been quiet in a particular sector, so carriers jump under another carrier. You see flatbed carriers with headache racks pulling, show freight at theatres, over winter. So there's always a capacity migration that goes on, but in dry van, in flatbed in particular, those carriers that have got their own trailers and very specialised, I think, are doing exceptionally well at the moment.
Yeah, I sent you, as you know, an article about the ports, and I have to throw my New Jersey, New York ports being number one again.
Yeah,
I mean, it's funny. The months that we've been talking about this, Dean, for the last quarter, if not longer, about that huge shift that you and I saw, we kind of called that out, and we talked about the Savannah and Baltimore's and the New York, New Jersey ports. What are your thoughts on that? And let's get into the St. Lawrence waterway. We touched base on that too long ago because Bill's on the show. Give us information on that as well.
Yeah. So if I look at the peers numbers, New York remained the number one spot for the most number of containers imported. up. So remember, volumes are down overall across all ports, with the exception of Vancouver, BC. Volumes were up slightly, just 1% in February. Most of the top 10 ports were down. Year-over-year numbers, I think, are pretty important to look at here. New York volumes are down 25% year-over-year. Los Angeles down 41% year-over-year. So they've lost a lot more volume. If you extrapolate that out to the shift in coastal volumes, this time a year ago, the West Coast was 46% of imports. Today, it's 40%. So it's dropped 6 points. On the East Coast, last year it was 45%. It's up to 48%. Gulf Coast used to be 8% of volume. It's up to 11%. And the data point that jumped out at me when you look at the coastal shift in imports, East Coast year-over-year volumes are down 20%. All of the West Coast down 33%, but Gulf Coast 0% flat. So it's the one coast that's kind of flat to maintaining its market share, and it's been a data point that we've watched really closely because it's correlated closely to the dramatic rise in truckload spot market volume we've seen in dry van, reefer, and flatbed, because the Gulf Coast has been a great place to bring a lot of break bulk freight. Outside of containers, we've seen a lot of break bulk volume hit flatbed markets in both New Orleans, Mobile, and Houston over the course of the last 18 months. So that's sort of the summary of that. The shift has happened. It continues. And the one point that we were hypothesizing about last week was, would this stick? And I would say to you that as we've seen the increased volume of imports coming in from Southeast Asia versus Northeast Asia, China, Vietnam, Taiwan, China split, that is coming, traveling west through the Suez Canal direct to the East Coast. And the fact that Norfolk Southern is putting a direct service to Memphis out of Norfolk, which is, Memphis is the logistics hub of the country. When you look at all the railroads and interstates that intersect there, not to mention a few barges. So I think that to me is telling that they're going to invest infrastructure to capture that market share to run that freight sort of west. I don't know if it's going to be lower rates west than it would be east. I don't know how that works on the intermodal side, but that to me is telling. And I think we've heard the people at Port of Los Angeles go from what was the word that Gene Soroka said? Don't bet against LA to, recently we're really worried we're going to lose a lot of volume. So I think that's inevitability as the labor contracts drag on. We're just seeing extraordinarily low volumes on the truckload side, exacerbated by big carriers like intermodal carriers like JB Hunt, Schneider, trying to fill a lot of their empty 53s out of Los Angeles. So they've been aggressively trying to fill those, and those rates, truckloads finding it hard to compete with those rates.
Yeah, they're dropping. I mean, I have a few customers out there on the dray side, and it's like, oh my God, like wolves on a raw piece of meat. I mean, it's unbelievable. Right. The rates that we're getting, it's just, but are they sustainable?
Right.
Unless there's a huge shift, but they're hurting and they're going to be there for a while.
Yeah. We've still got some runway before we get to this, clear signs on where the market's at. Most truckload carriers will tell me that, the contract side of their business is fairly stable. Obviously, the spot market volumes are, spot market rates are still trying to find a bottom. We haven't seen the bottom yet. Probably not a few cents per mile to go on our forecasts. But then that's why I made that comment about produce season, because seasonally, produce season really starts to drive that inflection in April. I'm somewhat concerned. Diesel can't drop fast enough to offset the drop in spot rates for a lot of our carriers who have already, absorbed fairly high operating costs due to higher insurance and used trucks that they've purchased. We're still losing capacity in the interstate side of our business through our, the data point we look at on who's revoking their authority and who's getting new ones or reactivating old ones. We're still losing carriers each month, but we're not losing carriers at anywhere near the rate we did in October and November. It has stabilized at about 2,000 carriers a month that are sort of leaving. That will turn and come back. But yeah, we were talking on our show on Tuesday about a month ago, and we said we always caveat our forecast with barring some cataclysmic event. Well, the SVB failure last week is kind of in that league where, had it got worse, or if it gets worse across other markets, then it becomes a pretty big deal, which sort of brings us right back to Bill's comment about, investment and startup companies. There's a lot of vertical farming companies that rely on, private equity firms and venture capital. A lot of that was affected by that. So one of the things we sort of said on our show yesterday was that, investment capital could be somewhat hard to find for new startups that want to innovate. I mean, vertical farming companies are already struggling under the burden of the cost to get them up and running. That could be even harder. So I think that particular event, it doesn't look like it's going to have anywhere near the effect that 2008 did on the trucking industry when we lost about 25% of the capacity in 1 year. It doesn't look anything like that at the moment, even though it's tragic for all those that are involved.
Right. So if there's any good news, that's it.
Yeah.
Good news there.
Yeah.
It's awesome to kind of like hear those things, and then we can kind of go there. I got a question for Bill in terms of yourself and Wellington Group of Companies. When we hear the word technology, there's so many ways that we can go with this. Everyone's quick to talk about things like Chat GPT, or talk about autonomous trucking, or autonomous warehousing. What does technology mean to you that you've seen over the years in your career? And where do you think we're headed? And how are you getting ahead of that curve of technology itself at Wellington Group of Companies?
Well, when it comes to technology, when you look at it, without showing too much of my age, we started off, when you look at the industry, I wasn't actually in the industry at this point, I'd like to qualify, but when you go back to the fact that everybody got really excited about a fax machine, that meant we could actually start, the customs clearances to the border without having to drive them there. Pretty innovative. Then since then, we've gone to e-manifests. Now, at this point, of course, you look at EDI transactions, you look at EFTs, you look at TMS systems now the type of TMS system we have, for example, we can make it as granular as a carrier wants based on the fact of whether he wants to have a KPI report, a carrier scorecard based on pickup, on time, damages, all of those type of things. Now we can actually capture everything with the ocean liners now doing our first mile. We're getting a much better connection with them to have visibility. Chris West, our vice president here at Motor Freight, is implementing Project 44, which will give our carriers the ability, almost like an Uber Eats that they're accustomed to now. So all of our carriers will be able to sign into this, and all of our shippers will be able to track their shipments proactively in that manner. I think the key with technology is, regardless of how much you implement into it, at the end of the day, it comes down to how does the technology apply to the actual shipper?
Mm-hmm.
If you come out and say, I've got the greatest mousetrap for this, I'm a 5PL and I've got this data, I've got this intellectual, I've got this technology. At the end of the day, if the shipper themselves are not set up or not in a position that that's what they're looking for, the technology that we use strictly becomes the internal efficiency we can provide. Biggest key, I think, when you look at it with the customers we work with technology, is technology allows us to be more efficient. The more efficient the shipper can provide us from a technology standpoint, those efficiencies we gain for both of them allow us to maintain and lower rates on the overall supply chain cost. So that's really, when you look at technology, a CRM system is not going to benefit your shipper. So having a great CRM system that a lot of people may want to blast about and talk about doesn't benefit the shipper. So if your technology that you're implementing, which is what we look at here at Motor Freight and the Wellington Group of Companies, the technology that we implement and we put in place is generally because it's value add and benefiting the actual shipper. If it doesn't, then we really don't see room or place for it right now. There may be down the road for some of the technology people are looking at, but until such time, again, technology should be there to benefit the shipper, not necessarily always the internal company aspect.
It's you mentioned EDI. It's we were working in my prior company. We were working with blockchain standards as being a way to move away from EDI, because EDI is kind of one of those longer standards that's trying to be sunsetted for decades. The fact is, it works. So the question we had from shippers was, why change? EDI works. I mean, we customized the heck out of it, and we put all sorts of weird comment fields in fields that shouldn't have free-form text, but we do it, and you write all the translation code on your end at the truckload carrier number site, and it works. So why would we change? So the status quo was always our challenge when it came to technology with shippers, because they were the ones that are going to drive technology innovation in the truckload industry, but more so than anything we can do, because we, as an industry, we optimize the heck out of our trucks and drivers with all sorts of back office technology, and then we bump a dock, and that's it. Like, there's no integration. Like, I've always said that the dock is sort of that gap between the dock and the trailer is where efficiency goes to die. And it's really what happens for a lot of drivers. It's you sort of hit a dock and there's this lack of transparency, unless you've got a tight integration with the WMS, which of course would be the ultimate way to manage, the supply chain. We always found that with the companies I was involved in, it was a big area of inefficiency, and it didn't matter what technology we, trumpeted about. It was always going to be driven by what the shipper was doing or what they were not doing in most cases.
And Dean, to your point, I think when you look at it, EDI is not broken.
Right.
It has worked for many years. And when it comes to technology, one of the biggest challenges that shippers and or logistics companies and asset companies using the technology is adoption.
Right.
The people using the software will not adopt it. They don't endorse and they don't support it. That starts to ship down. We understand that. But then no technology bring forward, regardless of how good it is, going to work. EDI, when we look at it, we use EDI not only for transactions and for communication on shipments. EDI we're using for billing. Our WMS system is actually integrated through EDI for shippers, so they can see their actual inventories, manage them right from a desktop. Where, when you look at our assets, which we run a lot of temperature control assets with both trucking pros in the States, as well as motor freight and supply chain. We have, the technology we have in place, which we've had for several years now. We have a position in operations where they can control that temperature, the continuous reporting. We can adjust it. We've got solar on top of it, so we drop them to the actual customer's facility. You don't have to worry about the unit running out or anything else of that nature.
Right.
So from that standpoint, the technology, again, that we've invested in, we've adopted at Wellington, is because of the fact that it's not only accepted by the shipper, it's endorsed by the shipper, and it actually provides what they want. At the end of the day, the companies in transportation that focus, whether they be a public company or not, and they focus on their own revenue before the shipper's revenue, the ones I don't think have the longevity and or sustainability or relationship long-term with their actual customers.
Yeah.
Something too, Bill. One thing that's not really spoken about, depending upon the size of a shipper, because you got the TMS, the WMS. What about the YMS and the yard management system that's crucial to an efficient, productive working yard to help carriers reduce the time spent at the dock, as well as the operations and being able to load the right trailers at the right time, at the right lane, right door. A lot of people fail to understand that, or they fail to ask those questions when they're going after a prospect and they're talking to someone that's large. What kind of problems that you're having at the dock, like Dean just said, where the engagement is lost is right at that door, when the trailer hits it. So I think that's something that needs to be discussed a little bit more, because you don't really hear that much about YMS.
No, and you're also, Jeff, you're hitting on a point that we do dedicated drayage and dedicated trucking on behalf of several customers here. And one of the biggest factors for that is the yard management software and GPS tools that we're using. That allows us to see the movements, the trailers, even whether they be a third party and or another company trailer that we're managing that drayage for and or that yard. We now have visibility to all of those. And that certainly allows us, when they're planning their outbound freight, and some of these individuals, they'll have 3,000 loads or shipments taking place in their yard on a monthly basis. So the key to that yard management and being able to see that asset, that most of these large shippers, we all know at the end of the day, the extra trailers they're dropping in there, they are using for additional floor space.
Oh, absolutely.
It's, the efficiency they give us through the preloading is one way that we can actually reduce their cost. However, at the same time, we do understand when you're dropping 10 trailers into a customer's yard, they're going to be using a great deal of those additional floor space. The yard maintenance allows you to know when they're unloaded, so therefore you can give them more floor space, and or B, you can start to pull your floor space away from them and turn it into revenue as a shipping company.
Yeah, and you get to track those trailers and their movement, right? You know where they are in the yard, and all of a sudden they're at the dock, but nothing's moving. You know exactly what's happening.
Correct.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's an interesting data point. We were at a conference a few weeks ago, and the head of Wabash was talking about trailer to tractor ratios of 8-1, and it kind of got everybody thinking 8-1 sounds nuts, because 4-1 would be more where some of the fleets are right now, maybe 3-1 over the longer period of time in over the road truckload. But they were talking up the trailer pools as a way to improve efficiency. Anecdotally, I'm hearing that people are winding down trailer pools because we're seeing demand decrease. But my time at Spiri on trailer telematics, we had a lot of large truckload carriers. We were managing their trailer pools. To your point, Jeff, a YMS was not in place, but had it been in place, it would have spotted the trailers that were having the wheels driven off them through overuse, because they're always the trailers on the front line, and you would have seen a whole lot of trailers on the back fence that were never used. And when you look at the number of trailer turns per week in a over-the-road operation in some of these large fleets where they have dedicated services for very large shippers, and in one case it was like 4,500 trailers at one customer. When you looked across all of their terminals and you plotted the number of trailer turns per week, it was a typical bell curve distribution. Some trailers did 0 loads. Some trailers, a bunch of trailers did a lot of loads, most of the loads, and then there was a whole lot of trailers out on the far right of the bell curve that just did an excessive amount of loads each week. And what it told me was that we had a YMS gap, but we also had a maintenance problem because it was time-based management, not mileage-based management. So they were missing the mark on most of the trailers all the time by servicing them every month or whatever it was they were running them across the pit. So I think that's a big area of opportunity for a lot of carriers and shippers.
Oh yeah, and the problem is that they're working on a FIFO when they should be working on a FILO, being not first in, first out, but first in, last out, in order to keep their fleet and their trailers moving consistently all the time, because time is money. If they're not moving, it's like, well, why do I have 30 or 40 trailers parked in there, and it's always a trailer A123 that's always getting loaded, and 1, 2, 3, 4 is never getting loaded and sitting there for a month. So yeah, I'm with you on that. Yeah. Absolutely.
See, I told you guys this was going to be fun, and
it goes fast.
I know it goes so much faster when you're having a lot of fun. So we'll start from the top left, Dean. Anything you got coming up? How can people get a hold of you? Let everybody know about the DAT IQ live show that you guys you kind of demo on.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. Every Tuesday, 10 a.m. We'll have both you guys on soon. We're going to get Bill on at a time slot that suits. We're live every Tuesday, 10 a.m. Eastern on YouTube and LinkedIn. We've got some big events coming up. TIA in April. It's April 19 and 20. April 19 and 20. The big event for us coming up is 2 weeks. So it'll be, what's today? Wednesday. So it's just over 2 weeks. The Mid-America Truck Show in Louisville, Kentucky. I'll be taking my Peterbilt down there and showing it. We'll have a big booth there. We've got a bunch of tickets we're giving away. In fact, 15,000 tickets we're giving away to Sylvie Shane, I think it is. He's a country music star for the big country music show on the Friday night at that conference. So if you're down at Matt's Mid-America Truck Show, swing by our booth or come out to the Grumpy Pete and say good day.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. And I know Jason Nesbitt, who is the president and CEO of Trucking Pros, who's a sister company of Wellington Group of Companies. He's going to be there. So I always say this every time you announce it. You guys got to have like a collaboration and make sure you guys remember us and have a couple of beers on us. Bill, let everybody know how they can get a hold of you, learn a little bit more about Wellington Group of Companies, and as well as the newsletter, which I think brings a lot of value to people like myself.
Appreciate that. So for me, getting in touch with me, generally, a lot of people do reach out to me through LinkedIn. They can certainly also reach me through the Wellington main number or website. They'll find my contact and everything else there as well. For Wellington Group, we're very excited that we are still continuing to have positive growth in this market. I'm fortunate enough that, I work with a great company that we do offer a first mile service, being all the ocean international freight. We do also do mid-mile with intermodal as well as truckload, whether it be asset and or brokerage. We do have our warehouse and final mile with our supply chain division as well, which does have sprinters as well as straight trucks and tailgates. So again, based on our assets, some of the unique opportunities and offers and service offerings we have, I think we're well positioned as a company for all shippers to be able to find value in what we provide in addition to the technology, the actual customer service. And the advantage, Ryan, you may know, but for the listeners and everybody else, the one advantage of the Wellington Group of Companies is we are a culture-based type of environment. So that being the case, everybody that comes in here, it's a pleasure to be with them every day, to work with them, to be part of this culture. It's a very positive environment. And what we do for a living, everybody understands that, we're a stockbroker and an air traffic controller combined in one individual in logistics. We're managing millions of dollars a month on behalf of a customer like a stockbroker. And at the end of the day, we're trying to make sure all the planes, trains, and automobiles don't smash into each other, like an air traffic controller. So having a team like this to support you in everything we do, whether my role is looking after something from a new sales solution that one of the agents or salespeople bring forward that they need some type of different transportation solution for, to be unique and provide solutions that other people have not looked at, and having this experience and wealth around me of the knowledge from asset and all aspects of it certainly does allow for me to continue to learn and grow every day, which is really what I like to do.
That's spectacular. And let everybody know about your newsletter as well.
The newsletter does come out every Monday. Sometimes I generally try to focus on most things that I think are going to affect shippers, that asset and logistics companies. I'm hoping when they read it and when they glean from that they can see things that shippers are actually speaking to us about that are concerns for them for this year. That's something that should concern everybody, whether you're an asset or a logistics carrier. Other subjects and topics I will cover typically over the course of that time frame in the article are driven by people in our industry that are asking me if I will take a look at this or what do I think about that. And that's when I will put out some sort of commentary with respect to that specific item, whether it's double brokering, cargo theft, whether it's the shift in, like ocean freight, stopping, like last October when I did the report that, they were going to shut off 50% of the lines, they were going to stop all the loops. Getting that out to shippers and getting that out to logistics people in advance, knew that come December, you weren't going to see the same volumes. And to Dean's report right now, January and February are running pretty much to the prediction of the 7 international groups that I'm connected to and what we did put out as Wellington Group in October of last year.
Spectacular. So there's the one thing that I tell logistics reps as I connect with them on LinkedIn is that there's so much resources that are free that we can all learn from. You go on Dean's blog, that is a couple, got a little plug that I'm involved in his latest report that he did as well. And, you look at Bill and you look at all the other resources, even our show as well. We give value for, there's zero cost to our show. The only cost I would say is just if you guys can give us a share or give us a subscribe or something like that. So with that being said, I want to thank you both. You guys are amazing, like I said, titans in this industry. And I can't wait to continue to learn more from you guys. And like I said, 3 of you guys got to get on a stage sometime and just talk logistics. So if you did find value in this, please like, comment, and subscribe. I know you found value because there's so much to give. So share it with a friend, share it with a neighbor. And like I said yesterday, share it with the Amazon delivery driver because you know that you got some packages coming over to your house today. We'll be hitting the replay at 2 and 6 p.m., LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. But we're not done. Jeff and I, we're going to take a little break, probably going to go swimming or do something like that. And we're back at it at 2 p.m. with Kim Harichen. I'm looking forward to this. This is a friend in the industry who's just a global ambassador for our logistics industry. So Cowboy, take us home, my man.
Yes. Thank you so much, Bill and Dean, for joining us on a great Data Day Wednesday. We definitely touched on a lot of topics. Hopefully our audience had a lot of golden nuggets and takeaways from this program today. Check us out on Data Day next Wednesday. The rest of the week, we're still continuing our conversations about empowering women into logistics. So check us out at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sales Chatter Live. With that said, Bodacious Cowboy is out. Have a great day, folks. See you later.